East Hampton Town Trustees, you're live on the air and being recorded.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. John Aldred here. Here. Ben Dollinger here. Rick Drew here. Tim Garneau. Jim Grimes here. Mike Martinson. Susan McGraw-Keever. Bill Taylor here. Okay. Let's start off public comment, and we'll get you in and out of here. How's that?
Sounds good.
Osborne?
Okay. Tom Osborne and McGowan, on behalf of the applicant. I think all you have presently in front of you is a survey of a particular property where we're looking for an easement from Merchants Path to the close to the property. I received some more deeds from the title company on Friday. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to go see the surveyor and have everything scoped out completely. But what you're going to see eventually, if I can show this to you.
You want to lay it out on the table so we can all see it?
That's the subdivision map of 6 full acres. The Merchants Path closest to that side of the table.
Merchants Path being here,
Yes. And subject property.
and this was the access to it?
Where's 114? Just for reference over on this side. Okay.
Right where I was pointing is the subject property. So what you have is a 50-foot wide portion that's owned by the trustees right there. You see that little notch that's taken out of it next to Merchants Path? That piece? You own that too. That was deeded later. So that map was not complete when it was done. And the survey that's in front of you still shows that notch. So that has to be taken out. You actually own that whole 50-foot wide strip up until that corner. And the
Corner, you mean this
on the
diagonal?
other side.
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, extending beyond that, you can see a rectangular area. That's the easement that John Leonard gave to my clients that takes them right upside their property. So to get to that easement, we need your easement.
This easement here.
Correct.
How do these guys get access?
You gave Leonard an easement over that whole 50-foot wide strip, and there's now a paved driveway there. It's been there for quite a while.
I think he gave a quick one to the trustee.
He did. He
Right.
did. Yep.
That was back in the 70s or
Back in
80s.
the 90s, early 90s, yes. So the survey you have in front of you doesn't really show the whole story, shows part of it. So I'm gonna have to see the surveyor and get it, revised. So it's plain what's going on, what you own, what you don't own, and be able to draw the easement correctly, assuming you're gonna grant it, of course.
So that's going to be to take access over the trustee-owned property that already has one easement on,
Correct.
or 3 easements, however many lots there are there.
It's an easement in favor of the subdivision, and those 3 lots use a common driveway that goes through the easement area to Merchants Path. We would propose to use that same driveway. It wouldn't make sense to put another driveway right next to it. It would be wasteful and harmful to the environment. And since you own the property, you can certainly require that if you want. But that's up
I'm
to
a
you.
little unclear as to which, is this lot 1 is asking for this easement, or is this a separate?
My
this
client's
is-
property is totally
Okay.
separate from the
Okay.
subdivision. Yeah.
Very good.
That part of town looks to be, I think, one of the last areas to be mapped and subdivided and so on. So there was a lot of uncertainty about who owned what in those days. And a number of the deeds I received on Friday from the title company look to be all quitclaim deeds. I think the trustees were trying to clean up the title to Merchants Path, South Highway. Getting quitclaims from people who probably had a description of part of it in their deeds, although they shouldn't have. So there was a lot of cleaning up being done at that time. But I think it's pretty straightforward now. It just doesn't show right on the survey that you have in front of you.
So is there a driveway already existing here?
There is.
There is.
Yeah, that services these three
So what
lots.
precipitated the request?
My
for
clients are
easement?
selling the property.
Okay.
So they have a landlocked piece right now that doesn't have access.
They actually have another access from Town Line Road to that property, which runs right by their house. It's not open. They don't want it open, and they'd much rather use an existing.
So this is truly not, this isn't a hardship.
No, there is another access to the lot. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Is the lot developed at this point or undeveloped?
It's undeveloped.
Undeveloped. So you said it goes right by the house. You mean it would go right by the
My
proposed
client's
house?
house.
Well, the property is developed. There's an additional lot.
Yeah, I'm
The
confused
lot
on
is
that.
here.
Tom.
My client's house is here.
So they own two lots in the area.
Actually, only three, but the other two.
Okay,
One's the
but in
house.
these two, they would prefer not to have the driveway go by their house.
Correct. That would be about a 600-foot long driveway, something like that, right by their house.
How do they get to their house now? Where's that driveway?
They have a driveway on the other side of their house. So it's not something that could be used for
Oh, okay.
the other house.
Is that off town line or off?
Yes.
Okay.
So the easement that you're requesting, Tom, does it go outside the confines of the easement as it exists? Is there any additional land
No,
that you're requesting other than what's already been granted the easement to these 3 and 4 lots?
requesting an easement in that very same area.
No change whatsoever.
Not from
Just,
this one.
you just need an easement for your client because they are not the holders of that easement, but
Right.
And you would use the existing driveway bed that's there to minimize
We would
impact on the
expect it.
environment.
Yeah, I mean, would make sense.
And it's something I guess we could encourage if that.
So this easement is for these lots and maintained by these lots?
Yes, the trustees have no obligations with respect to it at
The
all.
easements are usually written in that now.
Tom sent me the easement over, I reviewed it, it's such standard easement.
It's a standard, yeah.
So if we're tacking on to that easement, how does the maintenance that they're performing on these three, on the easement by these 3 lots dovetail with what they would be contributing as well? Is that,
Well, maintenance of the driveway, which is what you're talking about, maintenance of the driveway, is not all the trustees' responsibility. What we would do is contact the 3 lot owners and say, basically under state law, if we're using the driveway, we have to share in maintaining it. It's required. You can't use it for free, no matter how much you want to. But that's not the trustee's responsibility. That's.
Well, it
that's our
just
problem.
is in terms of public. We don't want a dangerous driveway that's not being maintained. So
Right.
we do want to encourage responsible management.
there's no survey of,
There is. You have that with you, Tom, the survey that shows, the one that I think you sent me? Shows these other lots?
Force of the house lot.
If you want to look at it, it's exactly the same north up. This is what we're looking at here. It's this whole area, same north up.
So where's the subject lot that's for sale? What is proposed for sale?
That's
The one with the house on. These other 2 lots are undeveloped at this time.
Can you just jump down here?
that's undeveloped.
Right, and that's not the subject lot we're discussing.
It's a,
That is.
But there is no house on this lot.
no. And there is an open,
There's a deck.
there was an open drive already right here.
they're taking access from over here.
This is the deeded access to this, which runs right by my client's house, which isn't shown on here, but it's right about here.
And this is unopened, correct?
Correct.
And where do they take access from what, over here?
Yes.
They don't want to have two driveway parts on the property.
They don't want two drivers to the property, no.
Seems like pretty straightforward.
Seems like the path of least resistance, it's already open, it's right here, we already own it. My major question was to confirm that we own this kind of weird little strip here on this person's property. Tom did send me the quitclaim deed, quitclaiming that over. I just would like to see that on the survey as well, confirm that we own that little piece. That was really my only question, was this awkward little
Corner there.
corner there, yeah.
Well, we could perhaps vote on it subject to getting the updated.
You need the revised survey to be able to tell what's going on.
Right.
So, I mean, I think in principle it sounds reasonable. What would the timeline be to get the updated documentation?
When's your next meeting?
2 weeks.
Should be doable. If you could put us on for 2 weeks from now,
Should be able to.
that'd be great.
So we want to make a motion to approve this contingent on the updated surveys.
I make a motion to approve it.
Hold on a second. I also want to add one more point that also contingent upon my review of the easement. Just to determine that the easement holder doesn't have an exclusive right, meaning because that
They
easement.
can't exclude another,
Well, can they say, well,
easement by us.
right, and they say, well, wait a second, we hold that easement, we need our acquiescence.
So do we want to wait till the next meeting, Chris, and take a closer look? And we'll vote on it? All right, sounds
Yeah.
good. Okay,
All
so
right,
it's all
so let's table it.
Next meeting's actually 3 weeks from now.
Is that okay? That doesn't hurt your client's position?
No.
Okay. Great.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for coming out.
Okay, next.
I would like to keep it if you don't mind, do you need it?
No.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, we have 2 people waiting in the waiting room.
Excuse me, Francis. Yes, who would you like to go first?
John, are these both basically the same subject?
No, not really. But Barley will be in both presentations.
Okay, so
I
what
think
should
maybe you could do the kelp one first, the Barley.
Well, do we have anybody, Mike, do you?
Are we still in the public portion?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it
Can I
might
ask
be good
a
to
question?
get that out of the way first. That way we're not hanging people up here.
Okay, so, yeah, okay, we have one other person in the audience here. I think we'll address that one and then get to the Zoom room.
Okay, whenever you're ready, just let me know. Thank you.
And Mike,
My name is Michael Hansen. I live in Waynescott, and this afternoon I received trustees' comments on fisheries from your law firm. And my question is, the question is about a comment made in there. It says, while the trustees have no objection to with commencing with work onshore for the project, construction offshore for the South Fork export cable should not commence until South Fork performs 2 full years of pre-construction monitoring. And in that document too, it said they agreed on 20 months. What does that mean? What does that mean?
so in the certificate, they agreed to do a 2-year fish study. Start in the spring, do the fall, spring, and then fall.
5 years.
5 year, but 2 years pre-construction. They missed this spring. In order to do a valid study, we need the 2 spring runs. So we're asking that they complete that task.
So is the monitoring, what is the monitoring of? Is it construction? Is it EMF? I mean, what is it?
No, it's part of the fish study, Michael.
Okay, there's a migration of fish in the spring and fall. We want the data of those fish before they start construction.
But
We have a fisheries study as part of the conditions that Orsted needs to comply with And the fishery study includes an acoustic telemetry study, which will look at fish moving by in each direction or in the vicinity, tagging fish. The tags give out the signal, the receivers pick it up, and they record where the fish are moving. And there's also a trawl survey where, a trawler will do tows with a dragger. That study is designed to be basically the same as federal and state surveys are done in the region. So that data is comparable. And as I said, the study calls for 2 years of pre-construction data collection, a year during construction, and 2 years post-construction.
Sure. Like Block Island had.
And post-construction basically means when the cable has been energized. So we're looking to see if there's any impact of the construction itself and whether there's any impact by EMFs coming off the energized cable.
So when will
to the behavior of the fish in the area.
When is the cable supposed to be energized?
In, let's see, 2024, I believe it is.
So the monitoring is more than just construction. I mean, it's monitoring a whole bunch of other things.
Before, during, and after.
I understand that.
Right. And this was spoken about with the applicant over the course of at least 5 years. So
Oh, I understand that too.
I'm a little surprised that they missed the spring date.
Well, there were a lot of reasons that they weren't able to get going when they were, when the condition called for them to get going by the spring run, the spring migration run of 2021. For a variety of reasons, that wasn't possible. So they've been pushed back at least one season.
So my last comment about that question. It says various experts have relayed to the trustees that missing the spring migration data is significant and cannot be replaced or supplemented by other data sources. Why not? What other data sources perhaps have been?
Well, it's site-specific, species-specific, seasonal-specific.
Well,
So you
Other
can't
data
recreate that
sources kind of
scenario.
refer to, for the telemetry study, there are other telemetry studies in the area being done already. And that data was understood to be, to complement the data that would be acquired in this particular study. Not substitute for it, but complement it. At trawl surveys as well, as I said, there are other federal and state trawl surveys that take place in the region, the mid-Atlantic region meaning, and southern New England. And the trawl survey for this study was designed to be able to be comparable to those surveys. And that data could be also complementary to this particular study, but not substitute for it. So those are the other, that's the other data that is referenced there.
And one last comment. So you're talking about the export cable. This is not the turbine installation.
No, it's a state waters.
So it's 3 miles out.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Michael, we were very clear when we negotiated with them that this would be a deal breaker if we could not get this study. And to start right off by missing the very first season, I don't think we should sit back and tolerate it.
Well, that's why I'm here, because I'm a little shocked.
Yeah.
To see all that.
Well, it seemed, we had been in communication, because all of these things tend to become an 11th hour issue. Okay. The final day for submissions was today. Okay. And we had some discussions with Orsted, their engineering team and their legal team last week, where we asked them to please give us in writing language committing to living up to that 2-year prior to construction surveys. They did respond today with something that we felt was short of what we were asking for. And we felt that it was going to perhaps compromise the integrity of this study, okay? Because let's face it, all of this stuff was negotiated as a consideration to the public, and the public being the fishing community's interest in the impact that this project could have. We didn't feel it would be appropriate to have them doing their spring study, and this is what was the situation, doing their spring study in 2023 at approximately the same time, which would be early to mid-March, that they were going to be pulling the cable from onshore to offshore. So to me, that was, and to the rest of this board, that was compromising that study. So that's what, Michael, that's what precipitated the comments that were sent in today. And we're hoping that the Public Service Commission basically listens to our concerns and puts it upon the applicant to live up to their commitment, you know, to this board and to the community.
Thank you. Filming,
Barley and the kelp study.
Barley first. Okay,
Okay, you want Barley done first?
please.
Okay, he's joining the Zoom right now. Just one moment.
Thank you.
Barley, can you hear us?
And puts it upon the applicant.
Excuse me, Barley, if you're there, if you could mute the broadcast in your room, whether it's on a computer. Thank you very much. You're live and ready to go.
Hi, can you all hear me?
We can.
Yes. We can.
Can't hear anything.
Right now, just one moment. Thank you.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, let me just get to the right screen. All right. Okay, so I'm up.
Yeah.
You're up.
All right, how's everybody doing? Good, good.
Good.
So kelp and more kelp. I have a quick PowerPoint that I will try to share. Acabonic, you know, we talked about the 3 Mile Harbor. We talked about the 3 Mile Harbor kelp project way back when. I don't remember when, but can you guys see this?
Yeah. Yes.
PowerPoint? Okay. So Acabonic Protection Committee wants to get in on the kelp thing, and they voted to allot some money to the town shellfish hatchery to just basically add on to the project that we're already going to do in 3 Mile Harbor. So we're hoping to do a few more strings in Acabonic just on the experimental side, just to see how it does. And we have two sites, so it's basically the same protocol. You know, we grow the seed strings in the hatchery this fall, deploy them onto long lines in November, and similar to the 3 Mile Harbor approach, would be 3 100-foot long lines about 20 feet apart. So from line to line, you know, it's about 40 feet by 100 feet, give or take 10 or 20 feet on each side. So figure 60 by 120, give or take. And one site that was proposed is off Shipyard Lane. One is off of our existing oyster garden at 286 Girard Drive. And of course, I have a map, an aerial coming up. Anchorage will consist of 3-foot screw anchors, which we'll set by hand. The lines will be 3/8-inch poly pro. And each line will also contain 3 16-inch round buoys just to keep everything up off the bottom. We'd monitor on a biweekly basis or as weather dictates and sample for nitrogen, phosphorus, and harvest in May or June. So again, just to reiterate, a winter crop, November to May or June. So the goal, again, just to see how it grows. And, we talked about this in the past. Previously, the conventional wisdom was that kelp grows in deep, rough water, but we've seen locally that it's doing very well in shallow water. So we wanted to see how this does in 3 Mile and now in Accabonac. And again, monitor the removal of some of these excess nutrients. And we're going to be using Stony Brook University for that. Of course, we would disseminate all the data to the public and, via our annual report presented to you, and South Fork Sea Farmers would disseminate. Here's the aerial of Accabonac. So location A is right here off Shipyard. Right here off Shipyard. And I went in and ground truthed it, and it's basically 4 to 6 feet deep through this whole area. And I chose this spot because there's really no development, so hopefully no issues with anyone looking at buoys. The other site here is location B, and that's, again, it's off of our existing oyster garden site at 286 Girard Drive, and obviously a little bit farther offshore to get into slightly deeper water and also to stay out of the channel, which may be moot because, again, it's November to May. There'll be some use, but very little, I would imagine. So that's pretty much the sites and the lowdown. Here's a quick cross section of what the line would look like. Your screw anchors on the end, 4 to 6 feet deep water, three buoys. Keep the lines about 2 to 3 feet below the surface, and hope that it grows. See what happens. So before I forget, I just want to acknowledge Craig Hassler here. Some of you knew him. Great, John knew him very well. He helped John establish the hatchery and build the hatchery back in the 80s, and he just passed away recently. So I just wanted to acknowledge him because I think he was huge part of the hatchery and where it is now, and helped build it and helped write up the history segment that we still use in our education component. So that's any questions, concerns about the?
Well, Paulie, I have a question, I guess, and a comment. I think it's great that the hatchery is doing research on kelp. Obviously, it could be an important local crop or form of aquaculture. But I'm going to go back to the 80s when the hatchery was starting and the original charter to try to restore shellfish stocks and hopefully reestablish natural reproduction of shellfish stocks. And I can't help but just be a little concerned that we're getting away from that original charter. And I know shellfish is cyclical, but it seems like we're in a little bit of a down cycle in terms of shellfish abundance right now. And I just was wondering if you had any comments on that.
The beauty of this is that it won't affect our production. So we will still maintain the same numbers that we're maintaining now with shellfish, oysters, clams, and scallops. I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as shellfish production being down, if there's any numbers there, if it's purely anecdotal.
Well, just in terms of, feedback from members of the public, that are harvesting, that it just seems like, and I think, John even acknowledged that he went through some peaks and valleys, so to speak, where stuff just wasn't taking. And I don't think it's not production. I know your production numbers are solid. It's just that for whatever reason, what's being put out and what's being taken, it just seems like there's not quite as much abundance in the past couple of years. This year in particular, a lot of people were commenting that they're just not seeing as much out there.
Yeah, we did. Last year we did have an issue with oyster production, and that's going to reflect because they they reach harvest size basically the following season after we seed them. So if you're hearing about oysters, that's probably the case. You know, we had, like I said, we had some production issues with oysters. We are pretty sure we figured it out. It took about a year and a half. So we're a little bit better off this year. We still don't have the numbers that we've had in the past. But, you know, I'm 99.9% sure that we'll get that back on track for next year. But as far as clams, we've been maintaining the same numbers. There's really been no peaks and valleys. And scallops, this is our second year in a row of some of the best scallop production we've had in 8-9 years. And obviously those scallops making it to the season and market size, harvest size, has been an issue Peconic wide.
No, it's no easy job. Thank you for addressing it.
If I could
August is the telltale. So we'll see what happens in August, between the coccidium parasite and the stress due to higher water temperatures and the cow-nose ray. But it seems like, and you're outside, you're on the water a lot, it seems like it's been a relatively cool summer. We might be singing a different tune later this week, but it seems like it's been a relatively cool summer, so hopefully they'll make it through. There were tons of bugs out there, tons of bugs set this summer as well, everywhere, just like last year, but they're just not making it through to market size. So hopefully that comes to an end.
Thank you, Mauro.
If I could just weigh in on some of the history, if you will. When the idea of a town having its own shellfish hatchery really kind of goes back almost to the 1970s. And the Bayman, there's been seeding of clams back from at least the 60s. And in the 60s is kind of when a lot of work began on cultivating clams in the laboratory, or the Milford lab mainly. So that seeding of clams, which was at first clams being dug from an area, moved to East Hampton and spread out, kind of coincided with the time that laboratory techniques were being developed in Milford. And there was interest locally that, maybe something could be done in East Hampton along those lines. And at the time, there was an ocean science lab that had an aquaculture component. So there was kind of, local interest in aquaculture by the fishing community, primarily, actually. And then when the brown tide hit in the 85 and basically, knocked back the scallops and really put a dent in the oyster and clam population, money was freed up for the hatchery and the idea. And at first, actually, the assumption locally was that it was going to be a big clam producing operation. But the proposal actually was sort of to have a multi-species presence so that we could be flexible. And we started with clams and oysters, and after a year or 2 years, we started to try scallops as well. And we had a lot of criticism in the beginning because oysters were doing well and people weren't seeing results from clams. And then over the years, as oysters became more valuable, that, it was understood that was probably a good thing. And people were more happier with our oyster production. In terms of scallops, there was never really, once we got started, it was clear that nature's production of scallops can't be matched by any kind of an artificial propagation operation. So scallops basically the idea became, we'll grow as many as we can, practically speaking, and seed areas so that hopefully the natural productivity will emanate from that area. We tried that for year after year after year, and there wasn't really much result. until, I don't, into the 2000s. We were doing it, Cornell was doing it on the North Fork. And then we'd worked with Cornell to actually do some concentrated seedings in certain areas in protected situations so the scallops wouldn't just be preyed upon. And what we thought was maybe putting out 250,000 scallops wound up being 50,000 scallops by the time the crabs got finished with them. And there was actually a big scallop sets a few years there, sort of in the 2008, 10, 12 range, that was attributed to these efforts. And then, bay-wide, other impacts on the scallop population kind of knocked that back, and not the least of which is these last 2 years of these scallop die-offs, unexplained scallop die-offs in the summer. So I guess, what I'm kind of saying in a nutshell is the hatchery was understood, at least by, the hatchery and the town that funded the hatchery, that there would be flexibility to move. And I see this kelp, growing kelp and experimenting with how it grows in town waters as just another, flexible attempt at, some positive impacts from aquaculture to our waters.
Thank you for the backstory, John. It's an interesting tale.
And I just have Barley asked for, in the Shipyard Lane area, there are some moorings there. There are some moorings off houses that probably will be put in and might be put in before you're finished. So maybe we could just, if the board agrees just to go forward, we could just sort of fine tune your spot so, we don't have any conflict with a mooring.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely flexible. They can be moved from year to year if necessary.
Orly, how long are you asking to do this?
It'd be great to, do it for 2 years at least to get some sort of continuity instead of putting it all into one season. But at least this winter, see how it goes. And then if there's a successful site, possibly expand on it or try another one if they're both not successful. But see how it goes.
Like a 1-year permit or a
Somebody
seasonal
want to
permit?
make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. We give a 1-year permit for
1 or 2 year?
I think 1. Let's see how, the results are, and then we can just.
Roll it over. Okay, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone
Okay,
opposed?
thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Orly.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
You sticking around for the next one?
I believe so.
Okay. Bob Timon? Mike?
Yep, he's coming on right now. Bob, go right ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
You. Good evening, everybody.
Hi there.
Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen and just go through a quick PowerPoint. I promise it will not be too long. Okay, do you see that, the Acabonic Oyster Reef slide?
Yes.
Okay. I've been working with the South Fork Sea Farmers, Barley, and some other people on education initiatives focused on helping to return the bays to their natural state. And kind of going into what was said during the last conversation, the idea of getting to reestablish natural propagation, which is tough to do. And one of the ways to try that is by putting an oyster reef in. The reasons, I think you guys all know the reasons for an oyster reef, but it would try to reduce the excess nutrients in the water and provide habitat for a variety of species in their juvenile stages.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
perhaps for the public's edification, maybe you could start by describing exactly what you mean by an oyster reef.
Okay. It's coming.
Oh, okay. I'm
No problem.
sorry.
This is the why we need it. What the oyster reef is, will be there in a second. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is basically, visually, it looked like a sandbar made out of oysters. In researching how to do this and look for that sustainability, it seems to work best when you have mixed generations. So there'd be mesh bags with oyster shells. Those oyster shells, many of them would have spat on shells, so basically baby oysters attached to an oyster shell. And that's how in nature an oyster reef begins to grow. They do best when they set on each other and begin to build layers of oyster shells. So we'd be looking to have not only the spat, but also to take derelict bags from the town program. So if someone abandons basically their oyster cage, and Barley, I think you said you have like maybe 4 or 5 of those a year?
Not quite that many, but a couple. You know, they run out of time, or you know, they overcommit themselves.
So any of those oysters, which would probably be in the area of 500 per cage, somewhere around there, we would also bag them and put them into the reef. So there'd be multiple generations of oysters spawning at the same time, because they're all going to be in the same general location and the water will reach temperature at the same time. So we'll get a good mix during the spawn. The place we've chosen, you need strong water flow, and you also need a fairly solid bottom. And when you see where we've chosen, I think it has that. We've worked to get community involvement. There are a number of different groups who we hope to be involved. And we're also going to put some blank bags of shells. So basically, we'll have dozens and dozens of bags of shells, mesh bags, but we're going to sprinkle throughout this reef some that do not have any spat and do not have any live oysters in them. And we're going to look at those to monitor for natural reef growth. So we'll be able to tell if we're getting to that reestablishing natural propagation, which is the objective. This really, the spot chosen is right where Barley chose his first location A. The no shellfishing marker in this area is right here. So we'd be just inside the no shellfishing area, which is where the water needs to be filtered the most and where people will not be taking shellfish from the reef. It's closed to shellfishing year-round. The water quality is already monitored in this area, so we have a baseline to see how the quality has been over the last few years. There's a good water flow with the tide change. It has a solid bottom, whereas on the other side over here, there was probably about 8 to 10 inches of silt, and on this side it had about 2 inches of silt. So it's a good bottom. The shoreline is undeveloped, and it's close to the spring schools. And that's important because this is part of our education initiative at South Fork Sea Farmers. I've already talked to the administration at Spring School District, and they're excited about being involved and getting kids involved in building this oyster reef. We've also developed 4 different projects that have to do with oysters and other shellfish in our bays, and visiting the hatchery that will kind of get kids prepared for where this fits in the ecosystem. Here's the marker for year-round shellfishing, or no year-round shellfishing. And this point right here, you'll see on the next slide, the marker's about here. And we'd be looking to put the oyster reef in this area here, maybe 20 yards, 3 bags deep, and slightly below the low tide mark.
What do you mean 20 yards? 20 yards long?
About 20 yards long, coming generally in this area. And these bags aren't that big, so there'd be 3 bags laid slightly on top of each other, but not stacked, like tiered. The South Fork Sea Farmers are looking to coordinate the project, do fundraising and grant writing. The East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery will provide the spat-on shell and technical support. We're looking to get involved with the Accabonock Protection Committee. I emailed them the other day. The Spring School District is already on board. The surf riders already do work in that area by monitoring the water quality, and we'd be also talking to the Cornell Cooperative to get their support. Questions?
Yeah, Bob, Francis Bach. My first question is, who is South Fork Sea Farmers? I'm sorry, this is the first time I'm hearing of this organization.
Barley, you actually have a better background there than I. So,
South Fork Sea Farmers it's kind of like the educational arm of the hatchery and the gardening program. It was spawned, if you will, from the gardening program, just as a means of fundraising and enhancing the educational component of the hatchery. And it's a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit with a board of about 4 or 5 people, most of which are oyster gardeners. And they're just passionate about the oyster gardening and getting the word out about it and getting the word out about, what's happening in the harbors and bays and how to keep them clean or get them back to clean.
Okay, thank you.
What's the status of, are you looking for us to weigh in before you go for permits? And what do you expect to be faced with when you do go for permits?
Barley, you probably know more about this than I.
Yeah, just the since it's your bottom land, get your permission to do it. And then I actually haven't spoken to Wade about this in a while, but I've heard anecdotally that permitting for things like reefs is getting much simpler. Maybe because they're finally seeing that it's, worthwhile and we don't need more hurdles to do things like this. But I'll talk to Wade about it and get a better idea. But I think a lot of other people have cleared the path for it, so I don't see it. As long as we have your permission to do it, I don't think it would be a major hurdle.
And what do you see the time frame that you're looking for?
If we can get our act together next year, next spawning season, set the spat on shell, get the kids involved and get them set in those bags.
I kind of meant more, how long are you looking to keep this in the water?
I would imagine that it would be multiple years. I mean, it's nothing we're going to take out of the water. We're not putting in anything that's not naturally occurring in the water. We're putting in, even the bags, we're looking to have biodegradable bags so that they also will just become part of the environment. And hopefully the shellfish, the reef, will begin to self-propagate. And then if we set a pattern that makes sense and grows and has the impact on the water quality that we're hoping for, well, then this is something we can replicate in other places in need.
So Bob, what is the purpose of the bags?
The bag is just to stabilize, because in nature, they would be stuck together. With this spat on shell would be happening generation after generation. And if you go and see a natural oyster reef, they have to chisel them off and break them off to harvest those oysters. So that's not what we have now. We have basically oysters that are set on culch. That's why they're by themselves. That's not the way it would happen in nature. We're trying to replicate what actually happened in nature. And if we can get that growing, then it would start to take its own form, would stick together. The shells would become intertwined, interlocked, and that would just begin to expand, which would be fantastic. Very hard to do. They've done a lot of this in Chesapeake Bay. They've done a lot up in New England, and it's been successful. But if we can get it to become self-sustaining, I think we'll have done something good. And they usually put it in non-biodegradable bags, sometimes even metal fencing. If you look at the billion oyster project going on in New York Harbor, it's in these big giant wire cages, which are something we want to avoid. Absolutely. You know, we want something that's going to dissipate into the water and actually have a natural oyster reef.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions?
No, it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. This thing, I mean, you basically like it to stay there indefinitely, right?
Yes, and if we do this right, it will grow on its own. I mean, that would be exciting if we get an oyster reef to begin that reestablishing itself as the way it would in nature. They don't exist anymore on Long Island. They used to be everywhere.
It was the New York Harbor was like solid oyster reefs one time, many years ago.
Yeah.
Are you looking for a letter of permission, a letter of support?
I think both would be great.
They'd need permission.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, would assume support.
Okay, we'll read.
But I think, I mean, we have to put a time frame on this, I think. You know, I mean, I understand if this works out, it'll go on. But I think we still need to, if we're going to give permission for a certain amount of time. Again, get, reports and.
Well, I don't,
go from there.
John, I don't think we can give a set timeline for the simple fact that you guys need other agency permits. So we could do a timeline based on when they procure their other permitting.
Well, I just have one quick question for the timeline. How did you anticipate incorporating the students from spring school into the project? Would that affect?
As part of the other curriculum we've written for the schools, the local schools, they dig into the life cycle of bivalves in our bays. And so they'll understand how oysters set on shell. And what they could do, and they've done this in other places, and you can see videos of people in the Chesapeake Bay children classes, basically building the reefs. It's right behind the general store, right? Right where that kayak rental is. If we can get them to participate, we could actually have 8th graders kayaking bags over and helping those stake them into the ground and filling the bags even. So there's a lot of participation that could easily be done by the older kids in elementary school.
So my understanding is that this site that you're proposing it's all private property, so you'd be accessing it by water all the time?
Yes, it's about, I'm going to say maybe a 60 to 80 yard paddle from the boat ramp.
Anybody want to make a motion?
I have one more question, maybe for Barley. Do you know what the EC permit might say for this in terms of, would they just give an open-ended permit, or do they just give a permit for a certain amount of time to assess the success of the establishment of the reef? Do you know that?
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, because the last I heard, doing this kind of thing required a fill permit, but I think that's changed. And that's one of the things I need to get talk to Wade about and get an update on. But otherwise, I would imagine it's just an annual renewal kind of thing, just like our hatchery and our off-bottom culture permits to seed, quote unquote, seed the reef with new shell each year. But I'll definitely get that clarified from Wade.
We did some of these projects over in Northwest Harbor with Cornell when I was doing a lot of private fundraising back in the 2010 to 2015 era. And I thought Kim said she had a pretty good understanding of the permits that were required. So we did one outside the breakwater and then one off Little Northwest Creek in that time frame. So, maybe she would be a source of information on that, because they're continuing to do these sites, the Marine Meadows sites and things like that. So I would think their permit's pretty similar to what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, I'll
I
reach
know
out
that-
for sure.
I know that John Nicholas Sunset Cove Marina submission to the DEC first went to Shell Fisheries. Then they asked Region 1, who gives tidal wetland and these fill permits, if they felt they needed to weigh in. And they did feel they needed to weigh in on that project. So it might go the same way, where the first application would go to Shell Fisheries, and then they would ask Region 1 if they feel they needed to weigh in. And I would think that if this is a new thing for the DEC, or a relatively new thing, Region 1 would want to look at it. Because it's in shallow water, close to shore, they may feel that sort of tidal wetlands applies here. Not that they would necessarily be, look at it negatively, but I think they would want to weigh in.
Yeah, I think they all want to know what's going on either way.
Right. So do we want to issue an initial letter of support that you could bring to the permitting process and then permission to follow, or is it all in one?
I think all we'd really need is a signature on the permit from the property owner, which is you. That's all we really need initially. I don't think a letter is even necessary. It's really just a signature on the application.
Do you want to submit an application then to us for this project?
Sure, if you have one.
Yep. I think standard application form.
Yeah, it's a standard application. You just fill in what you're applying for.
Do we want to vote on that now or wait for the actual application?
We wait for the
Maybe we should
application.
wait.
Wait a couple weeks, probably. Does that slow you up?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's good.
I'm still just, a little stuck on a time frame because, I mean, it's property we're in trust for the public here. And we just want to,
Know how long we're going to
limit
it.
It may be.
5-year type thing. I'm thinking, just to give them enough time to work into it and see how it's establishing itself.
Hopefully it produces shellfish for the public to benefit from. So hopefully it's a win-win all
Oh,
around.
no, I'm not, yeah, it's just my understanding of the nature of of common land, really. Common lands in Europe were kind of given out to people to farm. But there was always a limitation on it, so that, a time limitation on it, so that, it didn't just revert to private property.
So the permit would have to be renewed by the ownership of the commonality.
Well, I think you got to give them a permit that actually gives them enough time to assess.
Yeah, I don't care how much time it
The
is.
success of this. And, I got to be honest, on things like this, I kind of hate having somebody come back every year to get a
Well,
permit.
I'm not saying every year.
5 years sounds like it might be reasonable.
5 years, 10 years, whatever, I don't know, but.
Barley, 5 years work.
Yeah, it's great.
5 years would be good, yeah.
All right.
Submit it. Look,
So why don't you fill out an application and then we'll bring it up again the next 3 weeks from now?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay,
Hey, thanks for coming, guys.
thank
Thanks.
you very much.
thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, thank
See you
you,
later.
Bob.
Hey, Mike, is there anyone else in the wings?
There is nobody on the phone line. There is nobody in Zoom.
Great, thank you. Move on to new business. Excuse me. Keith Grimes, Inc., requesting access over the Trustee Beach to do sand replenishment behind the bulkhead at Big Rock Holdings LLC at 36 Last Point Road. So he's backfilling a bulkhead, and the only way he can access it is from the beach side. He's asking for permission to do that in order to get his DEC permit.
I was down at that beach yesterday. It's looking great. It just sounds like a pretty standard thing.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to grant the standard, no equipment on the beach over, all the standard insurance stuff.
Yeah, and they'll have insurance and all that's in those conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no equipment on the beach overnight or over the weekends. It's only 1 to 2 day project.
No, it's great the contractor, is reaching out and requesting permission. It's the right way to do it. So
Well,
I'm
they need
supportive
that
of
for the DEC.
it.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Ben? Next, we have an application from Ken Dodge, owner at 326 Kings Point Road, Suffolk County Tax 300-24-4-7. Place a 5x5 floating platform in his boat basin so he can access the water and his oysters.
Yeah, I spoke to Mr. Dodge about his request, and it is to facilitate hanging oysters, but it's also to facilitate access. So right now, I believe he has a bulkheaded property at the rear of our creek, and there's a section of the bulkhead that actually, or maybe it's a section of the shoreline that isn't bulkheaded, that would enable this floating structure to be kind of tucked in, if you will. And he's asking to get permission to put this in using a modular docking system where you would take 2 cubes and they're bolted together at the corners and create this floating area so that his family can access this stepping down off the bulkhead and be safe for getting to the water, as well as use it to facilitate the shellfishing activities that he has a permit for. I like the idea of modular type docking that can easily be deployed and removed. We're seeing a lot of interest in potential dock requests. And I think this type of an approach is preferable to hard permanent dock structures that are more difficult to install, more difficult to seasonally remove. So I like the idea behind, this type of an approach. The fact that some shellfishing is involved is a good thing, but it's not just for aquaculture.
Okay.
It's for
Hey, how is this different from a sectional floating dock?
Well, if you wanted to build 2 wooden structures of that size with flotation underneath, they'd be quite heavy, quite cumbersome, difficult to deploy, difficult to remove. So when you're using plastic cubes, they're easy to connect, they're easy to disconnect, they're standard pin and wing nut type assemblies that an Allen key and a wrench will disassemble them. So it does create a little more of a versatile installation, if you will. So I think it's a lot easier to deploy and to pull out. So that's the main difference there. Aesthetically, visually, it's still adding structure to the shoreline. It's still taking up.
Yeah, but this is my understanding. This is in a basin. So this technically does not require our permission.
Do you have any jurisdiction there?
That's not the way the applicant described it to me, but perhaps that's the case, Jim.
Yeah, I think my understanding is I think they would need DEC on this.
They have,
If they've got DEC, they don't have
they
a permit.
have DEC for the oysters.
Yeah,
Okay.
for the oysters.
They're asking for the float.
The float is landward of the water. I don't know. It's not necessarily.
It's in the basin.
It's not in the cutout. I think it's going to be adjacent to the bulkheading where he has property on the shoreline.
Well,
If that was my understanding, that it wasn't in
it wasn't in the basin.
the basin.
This is the basin, and it seems to have
Says
another,
in the base.
It's got a little bit of shoreline next to the bulkhead. That was how he described it to me on the phone. I may have misunderstood him,
Yeah,
but he
because I mean,
described it as a piece of shoreline.
if it's in the basin, I don't see where they need a permit from
Yeah, I
us.
don't
If
think
it's-
he wants
if
to
it's-
encumber the
if it's-
basin, but
If it's seaward of the bulkhead, yes.
Rick, do you know how he accesses the oysters now?
I think he's just hanging them off the bulkhead.
Yeah, actually, I looked into this because Arlene showed it to me on an aquaculture kind of an aspect. He's got a DC permit to hang He's got one of those permits where he's part of an oyster garden. He's allowed to bring the oyster garden back to some oysters from the oyster garden back to his own personal dock or bulkhead.
It's like the STOP
He's
program.
got a DEC permit for that, and then we gave him a permit for that based on a DEC permit. The DEC permit has him hanging the oysters off the bulkhead and only off the bulkhead. And my understanding is he wants the float to be able to access the oysters on the bulkhead from in the water so that he doesn't, I guess, have to hang over the bulkhead from the land.
He said it's been difficult to do the oystering and for his family to access the creek from the bulkhead. That was my understanding.
Is there an existing permit for the bulkhead?
It's one of those boat things that was on Acabonic.
No.
That was-
There's a bulkhead outside the basin.
I don't know how that lays into mean high water.
I don't know. All I saw was a drawing of the basin.
Yeah, well, it's clearly a bulkhead adjacent to the basin. I assume that's where he wants to put the,
Now, I have a drawing somewhere.
And my understanding was it was going to be next to the bulkhead on property shoreline he owns. But I don't have a drawing to confirm it, so we may have to ask Mr. Dodge to give us a better drawing. But, you know,
This is a
Then it's
survey.
really no more than a mooring.
it's like it's like mooring a little float. You know, we could probably secure it to the bulkhead without an anchor, but an anchor would probably help keep it in place.
Yeah.
This is the drawing he submitted.
Oh, that's in the
Inside.
basin. That's not, it's out of our jurisdiction.
I talked to Brian Frank about this in the context of, and Michaels too, in the context of, first of that is what does the town require of a mooring, if you will, on private property? And they do require mooring in the lake. You have to get a mooring permit, even if you own the bottom.
Yeah.
This may be a little different, I don't know.
I don't know why it would be. It's no different than a swim platform. It's smaller.
Except it's not tied, it's not going to be tied to the bottom. It's going to be it's going to be attached to the bulkhead on either side. Am I, based on that issue we had with, I don't know, that rebuilt bulkheaded area on the road basin, that we only claimed ownership of what extended out into the harbor past the natural shoreline. It seems as though we're not claiming jurisdiction within a basin like this. Shagmon Marina is another example that we don't claim jurisdiction because it was dug out. But one of the questions so if we don't claim jurisdiction, who does, if anybody?
well, it may have to the town, yeah.
The town does. I mean, the most we could do is give a letter that we don't oppose it as an adjacent property owner.
Another issue that came up in one of my discussions is if we don't claim jurisdiction for the float, why are we giving permits for hanging the oysters?
We didn't give him a permit for hanging the oysters.
Well, we shouldn't have.
Well, we didn't know where he was hanging his oysters.
Well, if he was hanging them out here,
He was hanging them out there, yes.
and there may be better water flow in deeper water there. So,
But we have an interest in the health of the water in the harbor as a result of, the oysters that are living animals.
Like I said, I think in this case here, I don't see a reason for us to be opposing this, and if it helps Mr. Dodge, because what I can see happening here is I can see him falling into the sort of bucket of tar of recent with ZBA doesn't want to move on an application that they perceive to be in our jurisdiction without us moving on it first. I think what we could do here is basically give a letter as the adjacent property owner that we have no opposition to this. And that may expedite Mr. Dodge's permit being processed by the town.
I kind of agree with that position on the float.
Okay.
I think, though, it's still in our interest to want to know where people are growing oysters.
Okay, but as you mentioned earlier, he has a permit from DEC
For aquaculture.
for aquaculture. Okay,
Okay, so we wouldn't necessarily have to give him a permit, but we should request of him and people like him. We already gave him a permit for the oysters, but in the future, we should request from people like him who are growing oysters on private bottomland, in effect,
Mhm.
that we still get notification so that we know what oysters are being grown in water that's, right next to our water.
Can I make a motion for us to provide Mr. Dodge with a letter that we do not oppose his application? And in that letter, articulate the fact that, as we see it, where he's proposing to put this float is truly not in our bottomland, but as the adjacent property owner, we don't oppose it, because if this does go through the permit process to the ZBA, we should technically be noticed on this, like any adjacent property owner, and this gets, it never hurts for an applicant to have a letter of support from a neighbor.
I think that's fair. I just would maybe add one thought to that letter, is that if he so chooses to move it to a different position outside the cutout
Then just come
basin,
to us and ask.
then just come to us and ask.
Fair enough.
Is that fair?
I'll second that.
Chris, you good with that?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
All in favor?
And should we have them anchored, or are we okay with just tying it off to the,
It's on his bottom.
yeah?
All right. Next, we have the Clearwater Beach Property Owners Association has submitted an application to renew their annual dredging permit under the same terms and conditions as last year.
Do you have a copy of this? I think I read this, and there's a.
Pretty much says same as last year.
Yeah, but hang on, I just want to. Okay. Dredging 3,900 cubic yards. Now, here's the difficulty that we've had in past applications by these guys, is they're applying to excavate 3,900 yards. And as such, we should expect compensation for 3,900 yards. In years past, they have not taken 3,900 yards or even close to it. So the only thing I'd ask on this is that perhaps the language gets amended slightly to read up to 39. Yeah, 3,900 yards. And I think the fact that they copied a previous year's application, it kind of fell between cracks. But you know what I just want to avoid is at the end of at the closeout on this permit is having an issue on we've gotten into a routine where we get in and we measure with a member of their organization, or in the past, it's actually a whole contingent. We get in and we take the measurements on the pile, we arrive at a number, and it's working. I see this as, if let's say,
I don't want to go backwards.
well, let's say our board changes in the next few months when this permit's getting closed out, I could see where this could potentially be a problem in the future. So that's the only thing I would ask.
Yeah, another thing I noticed on it is that I believe it's written that they want to stockpile the fill in their containment area. And I'm not sure, refresh my memory as to what we agreed there. I mean, 2 years ago,
We had some options.
We had limited the amount of material that they could stockpile, but they would pay us for the amount of material excavated. And the sort of what we were trying to get them to do is seek out use for that material within their own community, that they could actually get their money back. They could remarket. In fact, I bought sand from them, and it works. I pay them a figure, it offsets their overhead on this project, and I think that's the goal. My understanding is that is the goal here.
We gave them some flexibility.
Yeah.
Use
Yeah,
the sand appropriately on their beaches, either Clearwater or Lionhead or the community. Or if we're on a trustee, other options Jim we had offered.
Yeah.
For the cost of transportation.
Yeah.
So if they stockpiled oil from the previous year, are we allowing them to stockpile again this year? Is that, or are we saying, well, you got X amount you stockpiled, therefore that exceeds your limit of what we want stockpiled, then you're gonna have to get rid of some of it? Because the way they say is the location of proposed dredge spoil site is temporary spoil site at property.
Yeah, as long as they pay us, as long as they're paying us for that sand, and as long as any of that sand gets distributed in the literal drift, they're compliant to the conditions of their town and DEC permits.
So basically, we're good with everything. You just want to add 2 words to it.
I just don't want to have the battle, because you remember,
Measurement battles.
Yeah.
Just a few years ago, we had the issue where we billed them for what the permit allowed. And the reason we did is the year before that, they paid us for what.
They just paid you for what it was on
what
the
the
thing,
permit said, so.
How much less bill did they end up with?
Quite a bit, quite a bit. It ended up, I think last year was, I think it was around 1,000.
Yeah, so, but putting up to, pretty much solves everything, right?
And you know what, they are starting to use it in some of these other applications that are coming before us to backfill behind bulkheads, to add supplement sand along the beach. I can think of at least 2 properties right now that I believe do have applications in for permits. Excuse me, could possibly use some of that material.
They have the space to store it too. It's not an issue.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
We have a motion?
I'd like a motion subject to the language change.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? All right, education. Request from Susan McGraw-Keever for a letter of support from the trustees regarding the town's new draft legislation banning the sale and distribution of helium and gas-filled balloons in the town of East Hampton. This ban does not affect East Hampton Village.
Yeah.
She just gave me a little something to read real quick.
You know, I thought that this law was to the intentional release of such.
That one's done.
That one's done. Another one. So now we're trying to double down.
Yes, Southampton recently. So,
Okay, well, a little like fireworks. I think we should go still buy balloons somewhere.
Oh, it's not in the village. It's the town.
Just
So
the town.
if you really want a balloon, you can go to the village
Not
and
the-
pick one up.
Okay.
And she's just asking for a letter of support from.
I thought transporting them for town.
I guess you have to, it's a contribute, you gotta hide them. So she's asking for a letter of support to head to the town work session, which is on September 7th. So she would need the letter before then.
Yes, I'll make the motion that we compose a letter of support.
Okay, I'll second it.
all in favor? Anyone opposed? Was there anything else on the education?
That's it for now. Yeah.
Okay. Napeag Lazy Point, request from Amy and Adam King, leaseholders at 176 Shore Road, lot number 32N. Point to keep a pod on the vacant land next to their house so they can pack up to move out before transferring their leasehold to Margaret Schlitt.
Is this a vacant land that they presently lease, or they're just
No.
looking to squat temporarily on the vacant land?
The only challenge is I think that's a pretty highly vegetated lot.
Yeah, I'm not
Are
that
there any boats on that lot?
Sure. Maybe the one along the road.
I know some of them are used for storage of fishing equipment.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think,
kind of feel, I'm gonna tell you personally, I'd feel better if you parked your pod in your driveway. And that would basically motivate you to get the pod in and out of there sooner.
The pod is, I mean, it says,
It's a cargo container.
I know what they are, but
They might park their car on the vacant part.
you don't want her leaving it
Okay.
there after the new people move in, you know?
Well, that's my concern.
Or in the road and block everybody's travel.
Oh, it looks like they're already parked parallel to the road.
Okay, hang on, this has been, we've gotten a call. This will be removed August 31st. Okay.
Okay.
In that situation, I would say I don't have a problem with it.
A motion,
I'll make a motion to support it.
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, request from Susan Noble, leaseholder at 100 Shore Road, lots 52N and 53N in Lazy Point, for an emergency permit to replenish the biodegradable sandbags in front of her home. She has applied for a new annual permit for this upcoming year.
Okay, just to give everybody a little heads up, I got a call on Friday from Mrs. Noble. She was very concerned with the storm looming, that clearly by going through the normal application process, it was going to be moved. I sent her a written notice and gave her permission to do the sandbags.
Yeah, we've done this, that property for the last.
Well, it's, you know what, in this case, typically she does come back in every year and puts an application in. And in this particular case here, you had a storm looming. And she was trying to take advantage of an opportunity for her sandbag guy to get in there and deal with this before the storm hit. So,
Did she get it in already?
yeah, she did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we've approved this project numerous times in the past.
Yeah, she's pretty responsible about the terms.
This is a good partner.
Yeah, so we can, I'd like to make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Request from Daniel Newworth, leaseholder at 216 Shore Road, lot number 21N in Lazy Point, to sublease his leasehold to Jamie Cole, resident of the town of East Hampton. Have you seen anything from them on this?
Yeah, so this one just came in this evening. Ordinarily, I'd say let's give it some time, but I understand they're up against the timeline here. They'd like to lease it out on September 7th. And I don't think we have another meeting before then. I did have an opportunity to review it. There's only one minor issue that I have with this, and we might be able to approve it subject to this contingency, which is the affidavit of domicile is Lori Cole, and the sublet information itself is in, I think it's her husband's name. So we either needed the sublease in her name or the affidavit from him. Probably just a clerical issue that they can clear up pretty quickly. Just have the names flip-flopped. Other than that, I think there's no issue. Everything's here and looks good. I imagine they're both longtime residents. It's just a matter of clearing up the clerical issue if that's what it is.
Well, some people do split their residency between New York City and East Hampton.
Well, she's a resident, and her it's an affidavit of domicile is here. She votes and I'm against it. So the sublease should be in her name then, if it's possible that her husband is not a resident.
We approve this subject to your approval.
I'd like to get it approved, yeah, subject to just clearing it up and changing the name from Daniel to Lori, whose name is on the affidavit and on all the information.
Make a motion to approve subject to the adjustments our council's recommended.
There's a second.
Second.
All in favor?
So I guess Daniel and Lori, if you're listening, feel free to give me a call or Arlene a call, and we'll work this one out as soon as possible for you guys.
Okay. Fremont Harbor, ZBA notice of complete application from Bill Halsey, the Lighthouse Land Planning on behalf of George Schwartz, owner at 32 Hidden Bank Drive, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-35-5-1, who has applied to the town for permission to install a pool house, and deck.
This is, this isn't really in our jurisdiction. This is a house that's been torn down, and the only parts of it, everything in the new plan meets the setbacks except what's applied for here, part of the pool, part of the pool house. It's really not in our jurisdiction. They probably will be coming in for a staircase application. There's been a bluff restoration component that's been agreed to as part of the planning department's approval or a recommendation. And I believe there's also a 25-foot restoration zone behind the bluff crest.
Okay, so do they have a public hearing scheduled on this one yet?
I think that's what this notice is. This is notice of completion of review by the planning department. I don't know if it's scheduled for a public hearing yet.
John, have you gone in and looked at the application?
Spoke to Mike Delalio about it, who's handling it for the planning department. He told me basically what I just relate to you. The house is down. You know, there's only certain aspects of the new plan that are within the, that don't meet the setback, bluff setback.
All right, the previous straw house seaward of where they're proposing now. Is this question is this an improvement on the previous residence? I'm assuming it is.
I believe it is.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't think there's anything to do with this.
No.
Do we notify the ZBA?
Well, no, I wouldn't go right to that. I think it's one of those cases where between now and when this goes to a public hearing, whoever's on that committee go in and actually look at it. Chances are we have no interest in the application. It's not like we're going to go in there and support it, but and it's likely we wouldn't go in and oppose it either. But if there's issues where we think it impinges too close to our holdings, we may have an opportunity about it.
Yeah, like I said, the bluff restoration component, it's been worked in.
It sounds like this has been negotiated.
Yes.
All right, old business. Then
Francis, real quick, just to go back to the sublease in Lazy Point, Arlene just texted me saying that although her name is Lori M. Cole, her nickname is Jamie. So it's just a nickname that's used on the sublease. So it should be a simple change for them to update the sublease language to include her legal name. So I apologize. It was not a husband or significant other. It was her nickname.
Okay. Well, just Clam Pie.
Okay, things are moving along. Posters are done today. We're gonna get those up for mock-up printing. Everything else is on track, ready to go. Something new we're going to do this year, we're going to split up the categories. We're going to have a contest for commercial fishermen and then one for recreational shell fishing permanent residents. So it's fair for both. I think last year our commercial fishermen won 4 or 5 of the categories. just kind of have an inside scoop on
We're
where.
just glad we had claims last year.
Yeah, that's true. We did a decent showing too. So we're gonna just split up categories a little bit. We're gonna have a Clam Pie Showcase this year, open to the public to bring their special recipes for clam pie. We'll have a public tasting for that. That should be exciting. Something we all need to do is get 3 prizes each, if possible. You guys are out and about. I did that last year. It was pretty easy to do. People were really happy to help contribute to the cause and to the community. Susan also asked that we do a PSA announcement for LTV. So we need committee members or other trustees to create a public service announcement that LTV will produce and air. Needs to be determined on that. So otherwise, we're in line for everything we need to have a great competition.
So what is the date?
The date's October 3rd, and then the digging window is going to be September 25th to October 2nd. So we'll get posters up in all the local seafood shops. Probably, wait till you don't want to do it too early, right? For
Labor Day.
Yeah, Labor Day, get them out. Kid-friendly prizes are good that are get kids outdoors fishing. Yeah, that was great last year. A couple kids were so happy. Some big clam rakes, some clam baskets, fishing rods. The rest of it, good. Good job. Yeah, thanks.
Update from the Water Quality Advisory Committee.
Susan's our representative to the committee, and I sit in as well with her on meetings. So we attended the meeting last week, and there are a few items on the agenda that I can relay. First, Ed Michaels came and is requesting money for a new holding tank for the pump out material from the boats at Montauk and 3 Mile Harbor. And the proposal for Montauk is to put a 5,000 gallon tank, replace all the piping, and
Put an alarm on that.
Well, we have the alarm.
put a sight glass and an alarm on it. With all the necessary safety equipment on there. And come in for that first, and then followed up by a new tank for 3 Mile Harbor, which doesn't seem to require new piping. So that cost is going to be in the ballpark of $200,000 for Montauk, $150,000 for 3 Mile Harbor, based on some preliminary estimates by, I believe, by the engineers. And the committee just asked to get some better figures on what the actual cost might be before it talks about, committing the money. But this is money that, is sort of within the law, kind of like our pump out boats were funded. It doesn't have to be voted on. It's
Or the 20%, right?
right.
Yeah.
If I could add maybe a little bit of clarity to this. Both of these tanks, as I understand it, are almost aging out on these above ground tanks and sumps. They've got a basically described life expectancy. In the case of Montauk's, this year we've had a situation where a couple times we've had to stop pumping because tanks were at capacity. And given the present trends, Ed spoke to me a while ago and said, listen, I think it's due to be replaced anyway. It'd be a good idea to replace with a larger tank. And then they can also set up a little better infrastructure with it. So that, as John mentioned, the sight glass, there was already an alarm on there. Fortunately, some people didn't understand what the alarm meant. We had a couple spills. And, what we do have here is it is not just our boats that are discharging into this. There's some members of the public that use facilities as well.
5,000 would be enough?
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
How big is it now?
3,000.
Okay.
Okay,
If you
so,
want, then there's attention, any time you text me, put in the key is.
Okay. The texting back. Texting.
Yeah.
Did they want a letter of support or a resolution?
Just don't want to tell everybody what the key is.
Okay. Keep it quiet.
I mean, they're just looking for a support or a resolution?
no, I'm just
Just
relaying
for-
to the trustees the nature of the meeting. So the second item was IA upgrades to town facilities. There was just, there's a list that's in existence of 63 town facilities, ranked from number 1 to 63. And some have already been funded and are in various states of completion. And then the discussion kind of went to, it was a very brief discussion, went to what would be next. And really the outcome of that in the committee was that this would go back to natural resources to look at reprioritizing what's left based on the usage of the facility and the priority water body that it may be on. It wasn't necessarily listed like that before, so they kind of want to revise the list before they bring it back to the committee for further discussion. Okay, so then the third item was discussion of some additional monitoring that's being requested for the Hog Creek groundwater seepage study. That's a study that began in 2018, and we authorized it in Hog Creek, supported it. It originally started with a company that completed what they had proposed, but it was felt that was inadequate. And Cornell Cooperative Extension picked up additional monitoring on top of that first company, and they feel as though they need some additional potential hot spots looked at. Basically what this is going around the harbor and looking at potential for the influx of nitrogen into the harbor and in groundwater. And they're doing, most of their assessment is being done sort of just upland of the harbor. There's some subsurface probes that they're putting down under the bottom of the water adjacent to the shoreline. So
those freshwater probes?
They're actually looking at pore water, which may or may not be in the groundwater. It's sort of, they're looking for the interface of the freshwater and saltwater blends and analyzing it for nitrogen input into the harbor. And then ultimately the goal here would be to determine where there's high nitrogen input into the harbor and propose to put permeable reactive barriers in those areas. So there, the application, if you will, was to do some additional monitoring, look for some additional money. This was sent back to Cornell for some more complete report of what's been done and what needs to be done. And then the final, well, let's see. Well, this isn't even really that important. This was just being asked to look at some revisions to the law, which will make it not so rigid, so that if there's administrative adjustments that need to be made, they don't, the language in the law is such that it doesn't have to go back to the town board to have a full code change, just to make minor changes to the administration of the law. For example, the law has, in the law, it refers to the Natural Resource Department as the operative arm of the town that has to authorize things. The proposal is to put more fluid language in there, maybe just the town, so that, if it's not actually the Natural Resource Department, if it's maybe another department in town that's looking at something, you don't have to go all the way back to the town board and do a full-on code change. So that language is being reviewed by a subcommittee and will again be discussed at a future meeting. So that's basically it.
Okay. Thank you. We have nothing on the committee reports unless somebody wants to toss something in.
Just real quick, we had the presentation from Steve Warner and Rick Whalen last week. There is an interest in continuing doing some work for the trustees, and I think they're going to put together some recommendations. Maybe they could present them at some point in the future at the next meeting. So I'll be looking to share that with the board when it's prepared.
As far as that report goes, is it neat or is it very difficult to understand?
Well, I think that there is going to be there's going to be some follow-up to that, I think, under phase one. And with that, I think you would see Rick Whalen was going to do more of a summary and opinion component to that. And then, Steve, I think, has some final comments he wants to put together. So let's see if we can't get a little bit of a cleaned up final presentation in writing to tie that together, accompanying with some recommendations for going forward. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that's reasonable. I personally, I would like some clarification on the roads that, the history of the ownership of some of those roads, because they're really coming into question right now.
Okay.
They didn't really touch on the roads too much, right? It was more just on the deeds to all the properties.
Yeah, and to me, most of that property has been sold long ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter that much at this point. It's the roads we're interested in and the beaches. Ponds also, apparently, one of them we don't own.
And like the roads that were all grown in that maybe we didn't even know were still there. Things like that.
And you look at the map through there, and there's so many. Paths.
Yeah, and there's rights of ways through Havens Beach Park that the trustees set up years ago. Maybe the actual road that goes in there now. So let's see if we can't get a little clarification on the phase one effort and then see what they want to propose going forward. I am going to be meeting with Rick Whalen and John tomorrow over at the Crane property. Jim, you've been there before. I don't know if you're free at 4:45. We're following up on that dock situation. Francis has suggested some more conversation on that at the last meeting, so that's what we're going to try and do. We'll see how that progresses.
Yeah, I may not be back in town by 4:45.
Okay, we'll be over there, and I'll speak to Rick further about the report at that time. So I know he's doing some other research on town history, so he's kind of focused on this now.
Okay, great.
I just have one thing too for the beach committees. We want to do a video on how to build a beach fire. That's going to go on our website. Planning on making a PSA for the website and social media after Labor Day. Steve Warner volunteered to shoot and edit it. He's a fireman with Locust Valley now. I was up at the beach in Montauk the other night, and there's families all over the beach with their kids. They're not from here, and they got some wood and they made a beach fire. And there's nothing anywhere that would explain to them the law and how to do it, or the proper way to do it, or a safe way to do it.
Are there signs at the beachhead?
There's nothing.
No.
In 7-Eleven, everybody, the stores have a little, pretty much
you can just buy some
flyers to go,
There's no, I thought recall having seen a sign that talks about metal containers or something.
I mean, there's the Marine Patrol they'll patrol up and down, but then it's normally too late once the fire has already been started. So we're looking for some volunteers to be in a movie, a video.
I'll be in the video.
Okay, great.
I think I know how to make a fire.
You brought that up. With the events committee, there's a proposal from a local guy from East Hampton who wants to do a business of actually setting up the fires and then cleaning them up afterwards.
There's a few people doing that. I noticed.
Yeah. I didn't realize that there was a whole business.
There's a
If
market,
you
yeah.
want to have a picnic on the beach, there's a couple companies out there that will go set up chairs, set up a little fire, bring your sandwiches or hot dogs or whatever you're
When
doing.
done, they'll come and break it
And
all
when you
down.
get done, you just walk away and they come back and pick the stuff up. It's kind of amazing.
Well, I mean, it seems like one way to get these things under control, but people are gonna have to contract with them to do it.
Yeah.
Well, the only sort of difficulty that I see with some of these things is, again, you're into a business that's completely reliant on doing their business on public property.
Mhm.
And, there is that fine line between, okay, you're earning a living and you're starting to impinge on the public's ability to use things. Okay, we've seen that with the paddle boarding, we've seen it with the kayaking, we've seen it with the surfing enterprises, the clam bakes. And what does happen in some cases here, legitimate users go down to try and let's say have a picnic of their own on the beach. And because these guys have a permit, they go up like they own the beach and say, no, you can't be here. This is like our
This is our
venue.
Isn't that kind of the function of the events committee, to keep that in control?
Right, but when it comes to vendors, there's a permit issued to the vendor who then does it like a short form. Every time they have an event, they issue it so that the committee is aware of what's going on. There's not too many events on one beach, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. It's kind of, that committee was set up to
Right.
ride herd on this and
Right.
not let it get out of control as,
Yeah.
it could otherwise.
Well, I know a few years back, there was an operator who was a very good permit obtainer for the clam bakes.
Mhm.
And it was just, every night they were going to permit. Very, aggressive, and it was over.
Yeah.
So in that case, that committee was not able to really control it. I don't see how you could. They did so much business that they would need a spot or multiple
Well, you would
spots.
think that, as I heard Francis describe it, they would have to give this short form every time. And if this committee sees a short form coming in every night, they would have the opportunity to say, wait a minute, we're seeing too much activity here. Let's look
Well,
into this.
what's too much?
Well, the operator,
Well,
at
at the
the
discretion
time,
of
the operator was saying, I don't even like this short form. This is way too much administration. Why should I even have to do this? So, there's a very bullish perspective of using the public resources, it should just be a carte blanche. So, the business perspective is, once I have the permit, I have the permit.
Sort of.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I totally agree with it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that is the mindset that,
I think
streamline.
this guy's focused to small groups, family would go down and would like to, I don't know.
Well, there are discussions about making a video, so.
Let's take one video at a time.
All right. Administrative, we have payment of the bills. First
Do we
one
have any
is,
other committees? You just,
there's nothing on the committee
okay.
report.
Well, anyway, we're gonna do committee reports just real quick. Judge Pond, the algae harvester, is presently actively working there. They're doing a pretty good job. On a different note, Little Northwest Creek, I believe by this point, we have given Army Corps everything but our soul. And we should hopefully see a permit for Little Northwest Creek shortly.
That was a pretty onerous run with them. They really.
It was that request for public comment. And, they truly expected no response, but we got a response from EPA, which instigated, more paperwork.
They're a cooperating agency.
Yeah, and we are applying for state funding on this. Okay, that request for state funding precipitated a secret review by ourselves and stuff. So it's been a learning experience, and I think we're actually moving along pretty good. One of the things I was approached some months ago, we had Tim O'Rourke came in about that proposed striped bass study in Lake Montauk. He would like, one, to get a letter of support, which we would agree to do. Two, the researchers on that were on vacation when he came to us a couple of months ago. They're back, and maybe they would like to zoom in, much like Barley did tonight, to better explain that that proposal come our next meeting. I think that's all I have.
Do you have anything on pump out boats?
Oh, pump out boats, yeah. I got a call from the pump out boat contractor the other day. The Yamaha motor is in, and we should have the second boat for the end of September. I know it's a little late, but we've been fortunate. We've been able to keep up with the pumping this year. There's been a few incidents, but I think our people are doing a great job, and I'd like to thank John for helping get the boats out of the water before the storm, and also getting them back in the water. And I'd like to thank our operators who basically went above and beyond again to help with that.
I have a question about who oversees maintenance? Thinking of the trailer
that one with the locked up brakes. Well, that's a real good question, John, and I don't know the answer to it, but it's clear now that we've got some new equipment, and I got involved last year with respect to the pumps, hoses, nozzles, fittings, and we've been able to keep up on that with the help of the pump out boat operators, Arlene and Ed Michaels. But clearly, at the end of this season, that 3 Mile Harbor trailer, which what John's talking to us, I took that trailer down to Gann Road the other day, and it's from sitting. The rotors were rusted up pretty good, where you got a hard spot in the rotor, and it took a couple miles to get that thing to the point that it wasn't skidding down the road and smoking.
Burns through the tires?
No, it was, it finally did start to roll, but yes, it definitely needs some attention. The Montauk boat is a brand new trailer that we got with the boat last year. And to John's point, moving forward, we have to establish some policy and procedure here on a maintenance schedule. And one of the reasons that we have moved, excuse me, to the Yamaha engines as sort of a standard on the boats is so that locally there are Yamaha dealers. There's, I think, Rick, your Seacoast is a dealer. In Montauk, one of the marinas is a dealer, so that we can get professional maintenance on the boats themselves. So I think
who does trailer maintenance?
I think you can probably get that done at some of the mechanical shops and stuff. I mean, Riverhead Brake. You can roll up to Riverhead and get them done there, but I don't know if there's anybody specifically local.
Just make up a list of maintenance items that can be done by the captains from time to time.
Well, but John, you know what I did notice? The thing with the trailers, we're only, the other day, pulling those boats out for the storm was somewhat of an exception. The rest of the time, those trailers don't only get touched in the spring to throw them in the water, and in the fall when we pull the boats out. That's the extent of it.
Do we have access to a power washing station to ram off?
There's a hose down behind the office.
Yeah, but I gotta tell you, I don't think that's happened.
Well, I mean, do they even get when do the wheels get greased? Is it just when somebody decides?
It wasn't the wheels getting greased wasn't the problem on that trail.
I know.
Yeah, the problem was the
Trailers and brakes are a problem, and those boats are not that large where for short haul, it might be easier to.
I didn't try to look it up for brakes. It was fine.
Well, no, hey, listen, the one thing that came to my attention immediately is it's a 5-prong connector on the trailer. And both the trustee vehicle and my own vehicle only have 4-prong.
There's an adapter. That was in the office.
Okay, well, I did not have the.
I didn't use it, but I didn't try using the brakes for the lights.
I just.
You can make up a maintenance schedule.
Yeah, I think we can do it. Anyway, that's all I have.
Anybody have anything else?
I mean, if the town, the sand, they put in all the beach exits, are they gonna they're gonna get removed, or on the beach?
I assume nobody was supposed to ask.
That was like totally a town project.
I believe, actually.
Hopefully they'll just bulldoze it onto the beach.
Something like that,
Yeah, probably before the weekend.
All right. Payment of the bills. Norwalkie Smith, CPA, $8,000 for the audit. Everybody has a copy of that audit in your folders. You should probably review it and vote to accept it. Maybe by the next meeting. So, we'll do. East Hampton Marina, $123.08 for gas. Motion.
I make a motion to pay.
Second. In favor? And that's it. Does anybody have anything else? Okay. Georgia Pond's still closed, I believe, isn't it? We had a algae bloom there. Just so everyone's aware, there's no taking of shellfish. John was good enough to go down there and post the signs last week.
There's been some back and forth about making more visible signs than making bilingual signs.
Yeah, but it's on going to have to know
Chinese.
Chinese, yeah.
Trilingual signs.
Trilingual. We actually had, the DEC has signs in foreign language.
I saw them and that was sort of the last communication we had. I think we may want to use their signs. They're pretty visible and
Yeah, I had them in like 4 or 5 languages, I think, at one time, especially for Georgia.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Ed Michaels, and he's saying that they go down there in the evening and they find these people from Queens.
Yeah, with garbage cans.
They're hiding in the bushes with garbage cans.
Right.
And they just take them out by the ton.
They don't take care.
Suspect they're going to restaurants in the city.
right.
No, it's not good.
So have they had any enforcement?
Yeah, they've been mailing them. All right. Anyone have a motion?
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.